This time on Poll Hub, new polls in two of the most closely watched states are bad news for Donald Trump and Republicans in general. What's behind the GOP's problems in Arizona and North Carolina? We're going to dig into the numbers and we'll explain. Then we're going to revisit our Kentucky project. We released it last week, and it's all the polling world has been talking about, so we figured, maybe we've got some more to say as well. Hey, we almost made it. It's almost August. Well, only almost August? All right, well, let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion, previously on mute, but no longer.
Catch up, Lee. Catch up.
I'm catching up.
If you hear what would be called extant sound if we were making movies, I'm outside today. And so there might, if a bird chirps up or a fox jumps on the table and I yell, that's what's going on. The person who's probably...
Yes, a very idyllic spot.
It is nice.
Very idyllic.
The person who's probably yelling about our most recent polls would be Donald Trump, based on the results in North Carolina and Arizona, two state polls, two states that I think a lot of people are talking about as potential swing states, moving from the Trump column to the Biden column. At least that's something the Democrats would hope for, and the Republicans are fighting. The polls, the numbers in there are pretty persuasive that Donald Trump has some work to do.
I was just going to say that both of these states are states that Trump just carried by 3 points and change. So they were close last time, and that makes them even more troublesome for a president who's now running as the incumbent. Barb, I took the words right out of your mouth.
No, actually, I was going to give the results of the polls.
That's probably a good idea.
Which we did with our partner, NBC News. And so you're right, Lee, in the sense that both of these polls are also very similar, as were the results in those states 4 years ago. So in Arizona, we have Biden right now, +5, 50% to 45% over Trump. And of course, this is among registered voters, not likely voters. We don't actually do that until the traditional start of the campaigns, which is after Labor Day. And in North Carolina, we see Biden with 51% to Trump's 44%. But again, statistically speaking, these are pretty similar as they were in their results last year.
Yeah, and I would say that what's really important about these states is if Joe Biden were to win Michigan and he were to win Pennsylvania, which were two of the states Trump carried in 2016 on his way to winning, the third being Pennsylvania, which was the other upset. If Biden does Michigan and Pennsylvania this time, he just needs one other state like Arizona or North Carolina. So that's why these matter in a very important way, at least at this point.
Is there anything in these polls that show whether this is a pro-Biden thing or is this an anti-Trump thing? And I point suggestively to the approval rating within these states.
Yeah, where both of them are underwater. Certainly, Trump is more disliked. He's, he is a much better known, entity, as an executive. So that makes sense. But Biden, has more people who think that, who don't really like him than do. But what was interesting is last time in 2016, one of the kind of interesting takeaways was the exit polls took a look at people who disliked both candidates, because there are a lot of people who dislike both candidates and aren't really sure. And in 2016, Trump won those votes handily. This time around, Biden is ahead. With the majority of those voters. We kind of refer to them affectionately, as the haters. They hate both, they really dislike both candidates. We do see greater intensity of support for Trump. So in a sense, his supporters are certainly more mobilized to vote for him. But I think kind of the wild card in all of this, which your question alludes to, Jay, is that Biden doesn't so much need the intensity of support for him as he's banking on the intensity of support of people who disapprove and dislike the president.
And that's what's happening in both these states. 53% in Arizona, 54% in North Carolina. Those are like the national numbers. I mean, these two states are not outliers in any way. These two states are right in line with the national numbers on Donald Trump's disapproval rating. So it strikes me that what we're looking at is two states that, if you're Donald Trump, should not be in play. They are in play, and they're in play because the voters in those states don't like him very much.
Yeah, but here's the potential trap before the Democrats start, popping the champagne and measuring the curtains in the White House, as we've seen President Dukakis do in 1988, and President
Hillary Clinton
in 2016, and
President
John Kerry in
Kerry,
2004.
yes.
So
President in 2004.
They definitely have the measurements for the curtains, but they haven't really sat in the desk, I guess. But so what you have here is on issues, which is so making this such a election of great consequence, because we have three huge issues. Obviously, the coronavirus, the whole Black Lives Matter, race relations issue, and the cratering economy, numbers of which just recently released, are not pretty. But what we saw in these two states, and I wanted to put a footnote at the end of the sentence, is that in both states, in terms of the race relations and the coronavirus being the number one issue on people's minds, Joe Biden is significantly seen as better able to handle those. And people are definitely looking towards him. On the economy, not so much. And in fact, President Trump is seen in both of these states at the time we were in the field as being stronger in handling the economy. Now, what happens if there is some kind of treatment or vaccine, or people think there's an expectation of one? Then the economy might become more front and center. And that's where Joe Biden has to, if anything, pick up his numbers. And the footnote I wanted to add was, in some of the polls that have released even in the last 24 hours are showing a narrowing of the gap on the economy. So Joe Biden, who's been talking more economic issues lately, may be not only aware of that trap, as it were, for him, but also trying to address it.
Well, keep in mind, as we record this, the economic statistics came out for the second quarter are the worst, the biggest decline in economic activity in the history of measurement in this country. So it may be Biden talking more about the economy, but it just may be the economy doing the talking here, and there's not much that Donald Trump has to do about it. I did want to.
Well, but I think I want to hang on just a second on the economy, because I think what is interesting is that I think what the polls have been showing is that people really are, at this point, laying the problems that we're seeing in the economy at Trump's doorstep. Now, look, he has people who dislike him, and it doesn't matter what the issue is. They disapprove of him. But he has always, been buoyed by the fact that many people do see him as being strong and having the ability to move the country forward on the economy. So I think regardless of actually how the economy is doing this time, I think there is something to be said that he can still make that a strength if the issue becomes an economic one, as opposed to a health one, as opposed to a race one, as opposed to a climate.
But it's too early for him to try to run out the clock.
Before we move on, one of the things that everybody's talking about in Washington is obviously the presidential race, but there's now talk that will the Democrats control the Senate, and the chances of the Democrats regaining the Senate run through these two states that we polled. So we are talking about two of the Senate races that are the hottest Senate races in the country. One is in Arizona with Mark Kelly against McSally, the sitting senator, and the other is in North Carolina. What do the numbers look like there for these two Republican incumbents that need to hold their seats?
Well, remember, in Arizona, McSally didn't win the last time either. She lost
to Kirsten Sinema,
in 2014 and
2018.
2018. Yes. And she was appointed to the Senator McCain seat. So yeah, I mean, I think she has not been supported of late by Arizonans, and it was going to probably be a really tough race for her.
We have him up 53-41, so it's a big lead there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And then North Carolina.
North Carolina, Tom Tillis won by only roughly 2% last time, and that was 2014, which you recall was an off-year election, the first midterm for Barack Obama, and a good Republican election year where he narrowly, Tillis did win, and now he's trailing to Cunningham. And again, right now, these are two states where the Democrats to pick up both of these seats. That's a long way to getting the majority. There's a few other very vulnerable senators. Maine comes to mind, maybe Iowa, a few other places. And those are the one Democratic senator, of course, in trouble is in Alabama.
Doug Jones.
Doug Jones, and that's still one that they have to offset. Of course, if it ends up, whoever wins the White House, and it's a 50-50 in the Senate, that will break it in favor of that party. So plenty to talk about between now and November.
Oh, and we don't even know the issues that we're going to be talking about between now and November. That's why, sometimes when we're looking at all these forecasts and, we're looking at the odds of who's going to win and when, I think it's, we could go down a long, lonely road on that topic, but we certainly will have lots to talk about in the coming weeks. Last week we talked a little bit about a project that we had done in Kentucky, which focused on this debate in polling about whether education, which we all do know, makes a difference in terms, and is strongly related to how people vote. But whether that is something that pollsters need to and should be waiting to, balancing the sample to make sure that they have the right proportions of each of those groups. It was certainly a telling factor in the Trump-Hillary Clinton race, because Trump made up most of his margins in many states among people without a college education, particularly white voters. So our Kentucky project, which looked at something other than just simply fixing polls by balancing them by education and addressing some of the misses at the state level for 2016, got a little bit of attention on social media. Lee, you were in the mix of a lot of it. What were they going after you?
There was so many things.
And I say you because you were the public face on all of this.
I saw you heading for the hills when the Twitters started, the tweets started raining.
No, I just hide behind @Marist Poll.
Okay.
That's all.
Anyway, so all kidding aside, this was an important experiment because there's been a lot of talk about pollsters, as Barb said, needing to weight by education, and we were eager to take a look at, well, is that, as we said in our report, is that a clue or is it a solution and to what's going on? And one of the things we say at the outset is we got a lot of attention for this, and that was welcomed attention. That was what we were trying to do. We were trying to open up a dialogue so that we don't, as a polling community, fight the last war, when this war, 2020, could be a very different quality type of election. But the reason we get so much attention on this, not only is the topic important to looking at the election, is because of transparency. We make all these numbers available, and people were able to look at the numbers, see in the report what we've done, and the goal was to advance the discussion, which I think we did, because I think a lot of people, well-known people who, David Wasserman, Nate Cohn, and others.
Well, hang on, yeah, I mean, Nate Cohn of the Upshot of the New York Times, he stated he had many tweets on the topic, but started out with, and I quote him, "The Peace study does not contest, appears to concede that education is correlated with both choice and non-response. If that's true, you wait on it. As far as I'm concerned, that's really all you need to know. Miss the
Well,
point?
what would you say, Barb, to the answer? Why don't we always wait by education? It seems to be a good fix, a simple fix.
Well, well, we kind of ran down this, we got into this mess because of a number of the misses that the other scientific polls had made in 2016, as we've already talked about. Unfortunately, we were in Arizona and Texas, as opposed to the battleground states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida. So we didn't have a chance to see if our methodology would have provided any clarity in those races. But in 2018, when we did change our sampling methodology, we did have a pretty big miss, and that was in Missouri, where we showed that Claire McCaskill was going to hold on to her seat in that state. So, doing our due diligence, we went back into Missouri. And as I mentioned, Stephanie, our director of data management, went back into Missouri for most of
last summer. Yeah.
Basically, we couldn't fix the Missouri sample by waiving it. So even knowing the results, if we looked at education, if we looked at education by region, if we looked at education by race, by region, it just didn't come out the same. It had some small adjustments, but it didn't fix the problem. One of the things that Steph noticed was that may not be the problem, and that it was much more fundamental than that. And as we've talked about, we've seen that there actually seems to be some bias in what's called enhanced or listed sample that pollsters use to improve productivity, to make our polls, to be able to contact people a little faster, a little less expensively. And that is simply identifying phone numbers that are more likely to be households. And lo and behold, when we tested that theory out in Kentucky, it actually does seem to hold some water. Now, we did point out also that Kentucky's one place, one state, one election. But I think we also had some pretty fascinating results in just these last two polls.
I thought that was really interesting, because when we looked at just this issue of how many folks with a college education as opposed to people without a college education did we get in the samples that we just completed, that we talked about at the top of this podcast, in both cases, we kind of got the right recipe in terms of education to non-education by using the methodology we use. Now, that can just be luck, or it can actually be trying to identify, not using enhanced sample, but trying to get into those more rural areas and not get into, and this gets a little geeky here, but not get into the more densely populated part of the rural areas, because rural areas aren't all spread out rurally. Some of them have more pockets of population. And if you get those pockets of population, then you're going to overstate the Democratic vote, because they would tend to be more Democratic. If you get the more rural parts of the rural areas in the states, then you're going to get more Republican. We're trying to get that right distribution within each of those regions. And if we aren't able to do that, that'll be a help.
So let me just state something. Yeah, let me just talk a little bit about what David Wasserman said. Initially, he referred to not waiting by education as an atrocity, which I thought should probably be saved for things like war, pandemics, and other kind of natural disasters. Not for not balancing.
At his last tweet said he thought he had been a little too hostile initially.
Well, no, I know that, and the point I was going to actually make was, as we were having this dialogue on social media, he did have a question, which was, well, even if you do take into consideration geography, isn't the white male with a college education who lives in a rural area still more likely to vote Democratic than a white male in a rural area who does not have a college degree? And that is true. And the point is simply that what happens is when we're looking at enhanced sample, we are actually drawing more numbers of people with a college degree in rural areas and suburban areas and in urban areas, simply by the nature of the fact that people who have listed phone numbers are more likely to own homes, are more likely to be higher educated, are less likely to have moved. And so those listed numbers actually have a bias towards people on the higher socioeconomic scale, particularly higher educated people.
Yeah, and I would just, say that very quickly that Joe Lenski of Edison Research, who worked with us on this project, he commented that, waiting by education, this issue is just more complicated than a quick fix. So I think that's probably a good position. I don't think we are diametrically opposed to looking at education. We do that, but we're a little somewhat careful as to not use it as the be-all and end-all every time, laying the education parameter in there and hoping that we've now got the kind of
when the sample is off balance by any parameter, we do adjust to make sure that it's balanced. I just wanted to add to that Nate Cohn, we had a long dialogue with him on this, and he went forward and actually went to some of the other national polls who do weight by education, looked at their unweighted data, showing that there was definitely a need to weight by education in those polls. And he was somewhat intrigued by the fact that we did not have to weight by education, and concluded there may actually be something there.
So we got them talking, and that's a good thing. And we'll keep talking because they want to keep talking about it. The whole polling community is talking about this. And it is important to try and get it as right as possible because, as we're seeing, this election could be close, could be contested, and very likely we're not going to know who wins on election night, at least in some states, because of the mail-in balloting and absentee balloting and all that. So that'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll. That's us at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff's our editor. Amelia Morell and her dog Hudson are our production assistants.
We're going to thank the Roper Center. Hudson is not quite getting the attention. It's too big right now to get much airtime, at least on our visual communication. But anyway, going to thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell. I know in the story coming up, I guess the next podcast, we're going to be talking a lot about some data over time, but that's what we use. We use them to look at trends and things that are of interest over time.
And if you do want to check in and watch these just riveting debates on polling, follow us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. We love to peddle and give a shout out to our Marist Poll Academy. So if you want to get a sense of all the polling jargon, you can always get a refresher there. And finally, if you like what you hear, please subscribe and let other people know as well. So that's it for this week. Be safe, and we'll catch up again soon.